Hey everyone, it's Brian here at Red Leaf Ranch, and I'm really excited to announce the release of our winter fragrance this week called Sweet Mahogany. It's a really decadent and cozy scent that I think would be really nice for the holidays. A lot of us are going to be stuck at home, we're still in a pandemic, so I thought it would be a really nice way to make you feel really at home. So I wanted to make this video to walk you guys through my process on how I make these candles, just to show you guys, the love that is really going into each and every single one. So let's get to it. So the first thing I like to do is get our wax melted and our fragrances blended. And while the wax cools down, I get the glass jars ready. I have this beautiful wax former, our Presto pot, and it really is my saving grace with making candles. I'm able to make so many more at a time than I was before when I was just using the double boiler and these pitchers. So let's warm up our wax. Can get a little messy. We love a messy craft. That wasn't so bad. Okay, and while this heats up, I'm gonna get our fragrances blended. With this soy wax, I wanna get it to 185 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, the wax is open enough to be able to absorb the fragrance oils that I pour into it. And then after I mix it with the fragrance oils, I have to let it cool down to 130 degrees before pouring it into the candles, or into the jars. So while this warms up, let's start on our fragrance oils. So I'm sure to write down all of my measurements beforehand so that I'm just ready to go when making the candles. So this is probably the most exciting part when making the candles for me. It's really when you can get your most creative. Blending the fragrances together to make something really special that I'm pretty sure no one else is gonna have, because there's so many possible combinations when blending and proportions. So it's really where you can shine in making your candle something really unique. For this specific batch, I'm going to be making 12 candles. And for the sake of pouring in a graceful and efficient manner, I am splitting the batch into 2 pitchers. So I'm going to be making 2 small batches of fragrance oils to be able to split into the candles. So I'm really excited about this candle. It's a really beautiful blend of plum, cardamom, star anise, shea butter, mahogany, and cedar to add that smokiness. I think cedar is really probably my staple fragrance in all of the candles that I do, because it adds that beautiful earthiness and smokiness in all of the candles that I love. And it just makes it feel all the more natural, really. Oh my gosh, it smells delicious. I really need technology to get to a point where you can smell things through video, because it's kind of tricky selling candles when you can't smell it, that's kind of the point of a candle, at least with scented candles. So hopefully technology gets there soon. Hopefully we're ready for it. Let's start blending. When I was first starting, I was pretty messy when blending everything. I feel like I've gotten pretty good at knowing exactly when to stop so that the pour hits exactly on the mark, because you want to be pretty specific with your blends to make things as consistent as possible. This is our cardamom and star anise, and it smells so yummy. It has very faint notes of licorice almost. I think it blends together with the other fragrances really well. Oh my gosh. This is probably my favorite. This is a mahogany shea, and it just smells so delicious. That's the only word I can use to describe it. You just want to eat this fragrance or lather your whole body in it. It feels very warm and comforting, and Just really makes you feel at ease and at home. Beautiful. Lastly, our cedar. Oh my gosh. Now that everything's blended, you can really get a smell for it. Oh my God. Oh, that's so good. I feel like the cedar does a really nice job of uplifting the other fragrances. So now I'm gonna pour it into the actual pitcher and then do the next one and pour it in as well. Then mix it up in the pitcher so that when it's time to pour, everything's already in the pitcher. And then we do it all over again. We'll pour that in. I'm gonna get every single drop because that's money. Just gonna blend it together. And I'm really excited to add the actual wax in because when it heats up, you really get that sense of what or how intense the fragrance is. It really, really just elevates it. I like using this little spot infrared thermometer. It's really easy to just plop it up and see how hot it gets. Cool, we still have a little bit of wax in there melting down. And what I love about this, about the Presto pot specifically, is it warms everything up so quickly. It would take me so long to use a heat plate to get the wax hot enough to blend the fragrance oils with it. This does it so much more quickly and a lot more efficiently. Just a quick note before I mix everything. Ideally, I feel like a lot of candle makers probably do it this way, but it's best to mix the fragrance oils in the actual pitchers and not the Presto pot. Because then after every single batch that you make, if you're gonna make another fragrance, you're gonna have to clean out the Presto pot, and that can take a while. It's much easier to clean out the pitchers individually, and it just allows you to consistently make and heat wax. Awesome. So we're just about there. It is at 190 degrees, which is perfect. You want to make sure you zero it out with the fragrance oil inside so that you get an exact measurement of the wax. And we do everything in ounces, or at least I do. It's probably the easiest and most precise way to measure everything. Be cautious when turning the nozzle for the Presto pot because it can heat up significantly. Oh, there we go. And we want to mix it for a good minute. At least a minute, I'd say. To really make sure everything blends nicely. I like to stir it nice and slow. Oh my gosh, it's like filling the room beautifully. Wow, oh my gosh, you guys are gonna love this. Ugh. Cool. Now let's get the other one set up. Let's zero it out. Amazing. It's right at the temperature we need it. So now that everything's blended, it can take about like 20 to 30 minutes for the wax to cool down to the temperature we need it to. So it's the perfect time to get our glass jars ready. All right, so let's prepare our jars. I use 8-ounce jelly jars, a perfect size for a candle, I think. Okay, so preparing our jars is quite simple. I use cotton wicks, and they're already pre-tabbed. All you have to do is put the wick sticker on and stick it to the bottom. So tab that on. Get it in the center. Perfect. and I use a little chopstick to press it down to make sure it doesn't move when I pour. Or when I'm getting, I use clothespins to hold the center, the wick in place as the wax hardens. And I pull a little bit, so I don't want it to come off when I'm doing that. One. There we go, yes. It's like when you hit the center, you just like feel it, you know it's right. Like I mentioned before, candle making really is a craft of patience. A lot of thought goes into it. You really want to take your time with it because you're crafting a vessel of light. You're crafting a vessel of fire. You want to make sure you're doing it well, you're doing it right, because there are, some risks that come with candles. It is a flammable object. So you want to make sure you're doing it right to ensure that the people you share them with are going to enjoy the candle so much, but also they'll be safe. With that said, a few notes about effectively burning a candle. When you light a candle for the first time, you want to make sure you burn it for at least an hour, because candles actually have something called a wax memory. So when you burn a candle for the first time, it creates a pool at the top of the candle. And after burning it for that first time, every single time you light it afterwards, it's going to fill out very similarly to the first time you burn that candle. So, for example, if you burn a candle for, let's say, half an hour, and it creates a small pool, but it doesn't completely fill out the edge of the candle, every single time you light that candle from then on, it's very likely that the candle is going to start tunneling. It'll just keep burning down that pool every single time, and it'll get lower and lower and deeper. And what will happen is when it gets to a really low point, it'll be really hard for the candle to stay lit, because it's going to be warming so much of that wax that is now walled around it. So it's going to create a really, really deep pool, and it'll essentially drown your wick. Another thing to note is I do my best to cut the wicks a 1/4 inch before lighting. But after you light your candle a few times, you'll notice that the wick kind of curls over and creates a bunch. To be safe, you really want to be sure that you're cutting that bunch back to about a 1/4 inch before you light it, because when it bunches like that, it creates a really big flame. And the smaller the wick, or the more appropriate size the wick is, the gentler the flame will be. And all of this is on our website. When you go to purchase a candle, all that information is laid out for you at the very bottom of the product page. All right, so our jars are wicked. Now I'm going to be using these clothespins to center the wick when the wax is actually poured in there. Like so. There's this convenient little hole in the center of the clothespin that the wick fits perfectly into. And then I pull the wick and press it down to lock it into place. I am going to move it to the side though, so that there's at least ample room to pour. Otherwise, it becomes really difficult to pour. And then when the wax is actually in there, I'll just move it and center it again. All right, our first pitcher just hit 135 degrees, so it's time to pour. This part's always a little nerve-wracking. I want to make sure it's clean and nice. I don't want to miss. And I'm going to be sure, I don't measure out the weight of the wax that I'm pouring in, because each jar actually has a fill line that makes it pretty easy to gauge where to fill the candle up to. And I actually add botanicals to my candles, so I do a little under the fill line, because afterwards there are usually a lot of instances where I get these little like bubbles or air gaps in the candle. So I like to pour another layer of wax after the initial first round has hardened. And when I pour that second layer of wax, that's when I add in the botanicals and decorate the candles. So let's get to it. Here we go. A nice gentle, steady pour right there. Remember, this is for 6 candles. Ooh. I love the color of melted wax. It's this beautiful gold color. It's really pretty. Ooh, let's see how we get in there. Perfect. Awesome. And I'm sure to leave a nice amount still in the pitcher so I can melt it later to do that second layer. All right, our second pitcher is ready. Oh, it smells so good. Oh. All right, here we go. Ooh. It's a little tricky. I don't want to move those other ones. I'm about to bust out the left hand motion here. All right, I think this looks fantastic. Now it'll probably take about an hour and a half to 2 hours for the candles to harden. And then we'll see anything that needs to be filled in or fixed up. And then we'll add our second layer with our botanicals. For the sweet mahogany, I'm gonna be adding some dried hibiscus flower. It's this beautiful burgundy maroon color that I think will complement the scent really beautifully. So we'll check back in a few hours. All right, so it's been about 2 hours and the candles have hardened beautifully. We have the remaining wax warming up in a double boiler back there. I'll get it in a moment. I just want to unveil and talk about what we're really trying to do here when we add the second layer, because it's pretty visible right now. As you can see, there are some holes that have formed, and this is pretty common in candle making. There's so many little factors that can go into why it happened, but I don't really like to focus on them too much because, again, with this adding of a second layer, it does a pretty good job at fixing a lot of those issues. You get denting, you get air bubbles, and I don't like to focus on it too much. I feel like it really hinders me if I focus too much on the little problems, you know? But what we're gonna do is add a second layer, and what should happen is the wax will go into those little air pockets and fill them in perfectly. And once that's done, we're gonna add our hibiscus petals. And as you can see, they are this beautiful, beautiful, nice, like dark burgundy that I think will just complement the colors here or the fragrance really, really well. So there's usually a few ways. There's like 2 ways you can go about adding the botanicals. Either you sprinkle them in first, then add the wax, or you add the wax and then sprinkle on the botanicals. It varies depending on the botanicals, but with hibiscus petals, I don't imagine they'll sink to the bottom too much. They should float to the top. Sometimes I use things like rosemary, and that sinks to the bottom. So I have to pour the wax first, let it harden up just a little bit, and it's like a race against the clock to make sure I place the rosemary before it gets too hard and it won't stick. So I think we can get to it. Let's see what happens. I think here I'm going to place the hibiscus petals first, then pour the second layer. It shouldn't get in the way of the air pockets being filled in. Now, when using botanicals, I want to be very modest with the amount that I'm using. You don't really need a lot to add a really beautiful effect to the candles. I don't like to color my wax. I'm not very comfortable in my candle making skills just yet to color my wax. That's why I like using botanicals to add that extra element. With that said, again, I'm going to be very modest. I don't want to overwhelm the candle with too many petals, because it does raise the likelihood that it could catch fire if there are big pieces of leaves or flowers sticking out. So I like to add the botanicals in first, then pour the wax so that the wax really fuses with the botanicals and it soaks into the botanical. And then when you light the candle, the botanicals just sit in the wax rather than having these big leaves or petals sticking out. And that's usually what happens when things catch a flame. So I definitely want to do a nice amount so that, again, it's within the wax and not really sticking out. Wow. So I'm going to lay them in first. And then after the fact, I'm going to get a toothpick and really lay it out the way I want to get like a nice little design in there. I usually like to lay them down like a half crescent to give that moon effect. I am a moon spirit, so I like to showcase that in the candles. Wow, they're beautiful. Oh my god, this is gonna look gorgeous, especially with the color of this wax. Let's see, I want to get a nice little petal in there. Awesome. All right, now we can pour. And I'm not gonna pour a lot so I don't overwhelm the candle with too much wax. It's really just a subtle little layer. Beautiful. Amazing. Well, I'll put a little more in this one actually. Great. So as you can see, the petals do sink to the bottom and then they like immerse themselves in the wax. So the real experience of adding the botanicals is when you actually light the candle and you can see how they play and dance around in the wax. It's really beautiful to watch. So now that it's in there, you can play with layering them a certain way. Wow. And when the hibiscus petals are wetted by the wax, it actually deepens the color. It brings out the maroon so much more. It's really beautiful. It definitely gives a very romantic feel for the holiday. I love it. I am a Pisces. I have a tendency to romanticize a lot of things. And what beautiful thing to romanticize? Candles. Candles are quite romantic, really. They definitely set a mood. If not with the fragrance, just by its very soft and subdued light. So the final step here is going to be cutting our wicks. Now that we have the final layer of wax poured and the botanicals in place, I really get a sense for the height that it's at. And I want to make sure it's at least 1/4 inch in height so that it can burn properly on the first go. I have my handy dandy little scissors. Let's do it. These little scissors cut so easily. And it's nice because it doesn't move the wick too much. So it doesn't really disturb it in the hardening process. Fantastic. Now we just have to wait for our candles to harden, and then we can move on to our final steps, like polishing our candles and adding our labels. Our candles have hardened, and as you saw, making candles can get a little messy, so I like to give them a nice polish to make sure they're nice and clean before sending out. Give them a nice final inspection, and then toss a lid on. Wow, these candles really came out so beautifully. I love how the hibiscus just dapples through the wax. It's really pretty. Great, now we can move on to our labels. I do design all of our labels in Photoshop, then I order blank labels and print them off myself. I also like to specify the individual batches on the label so that in case anything goes wrong or the customer isn't satisfied with their candle, I can always go back to the batch number and see if I did anything different. Now we stick them on. Make sure I find a nice spot for it and press it on nicely. Awesome, and now the final step is to add our warning labels. We absolutely have to add our warning labels. You cannot sell your candles without adding a warning label. You have to make sure your customers know how to properly take care of a candle and how to burn properly. And with that, our candles are all done. Now to just let them sit and cure for 3 to 6 days before sending them out. They look absolutely stunning. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this sweet little look into all the love and care that goes into making handcrafted candles. I'll leave a link in the description below if you guys are interested in purchasing. Thank you all so much again for all the love and support and everything that we're doing here at Red Leaf. It means the world. Please feel free to share and like this video to keep spreading the love for all things homesteading, gardening, and handcrafting. Brian here at Red Leaf Ranch. Take care, everyone.